Sometimes, a bond forms that transcends words, a connection so deep it lingers long after time and distance try to pull it apart. For Daniel, that bond was with Kifo, a baby gorilla he rescued from poachers 5 years ago. Standing at the edge of the jungle, clutching an old photograph, he feels the weight of the warnings echoing in his mind. Experts have told him it's too dangerous, that Kifo might not even remember him, and that gorillas are unpredictable, especially silverbacks. But Daniel's voice is steady as he whispers to himself, "I need to see him again. I need to know if he's okay, if he even remembers me." Despite the doubts and the risks, he takes a deep breath and steps into the dense jungle, driven by the hope that some connections truly are unforgettable. 5 years ago, the air in this very jungle was pierced by a sound Daniel could never forget, a desperate, panicked cry. Following the sound, he came upon a heartbreaking sight, a baby gorilla, trapped and trembling in a cruel snare left by poachers. The young gorilla's wide, frightened eyes locked with his as it struggled to free itself, the thin metal wire cutting deeper into its leg with every frantic movement. Daniel moved slowly, speaking softly, trying to calm the terrified animal. His hands trembled as he worked to release the snare, knowing that even a small mistake could cost the gorilla its life. With a final twist of his tools, the wire came loose, and the baby collapsed into his arms, weak but alive. Over the weeks that followed, Daniel became the young gorilla's caretaker, naming him Kifo. He stayed by his side, treating his wounds, feeding him, and gaining his trust. What began as a rescue turned into an extraordinary bond. Kifo would cling to Daniel's arm, follow him wherever he went, and even mimic his gestures. For a while, it seemed like Kifo thought of Daniel as family. But Daniel always knew that their time together was temporary. As Kifo grew stronger, the time came to let him return to the wild. The day Daniel released him back into the jungle, Kifo paused at the edge of the clearing, looking back one last time. Daniel couldn't help but wonder if Kifo understood what was happening, if he knew this wasn't goodbye forever, just goodbye for now. That moment, frozen in his memory, became the reason Daniel now stands here again, hoping that somewhere in the vast expanse of this jungle, Kifo still remembers. Daniel sat on the porch of his small cabin, staring at the photograph of Kifo. The edges were worn from years of handling, the image of the young gorilla frozen in time. For weeks, he had been wrestling with the idea of returning to the jungle, to the place where it all began. Friends and colleagues had told him it was a mistake. "It's been 5 years, Daniel," one of them said. "Kifo is a full-grown silverback now. He's not the same animal you knew. It's dangerous." Their words echoed in his mind, but the pull to see Kifo again was stronger. It wasn't just curiosity or nostalgia. It was something deeper. "I need to know he's okay," Daniel thought to himself. But more than that, he needed to know if the bond they shared had stood the test of time. He couldn't let the warnings deter him. Packing his gear, Daniel prepared for the journey. Every step felt heavier with doubt. What if Kifo didn't recognize him? What if the warnings were right, and he was putting himself and Kifo in danger? Yet, with every doubt, a memory of their time together pushed him forward. He remembered Kifo's small hand gripping his arm, the way the young gorilla looked at him with trust and curiosity. "Some things are worth the risk," he whispered to himself as he zipped up his bag. As he stood at the edge of the forest, the dense greenery stretched out before him, alive with the hum of insects and distant animal calls. The jungle felt both familiar and foreign, a reminder of the time he had spent there years ago. Daniel took a deep breath, his heart pounding in his chest. "This isn't just about me," he thought. "It's about us." With that, he stepped into the jungle, leaving behind the safety of the world he knew and venturing toward the unknown. The jungle was alive with sound, the hum of insects, the distant calls of birds, and the occasional rustle of leaves as unseen animals moved through the underbrush. Daniel pushed forward, his boots crunching softly against the damp forest floor. Every step felt heavier as the weight of his decision settled in. The path ahead was barely visible, swallowed by thick vines and towering trees, but he kept moving, guided more by instinct than by any clear direction. Hours passed, and the jungle seemed to test him at every turn. The air grew thick with humidity, and a sudden downpour soaked him to the bone. He paused under a large tree, his breath coming in shallow gasps as he tried to gather his thoughts. "What if I'm wrong?" he whispered to himself, the doubts creeping back in. "What if I never find him?" But just as he considered turning back, he spotted something: broken branches, pressed down grass, signs of movement. His heart quickened. These were the signs of a guerrilla troop. He followed the trail, his senses heightened with a mix of hope and caution. The deeper he ventured, the louder the jungle seemed to grow, as if urging him forward. At one point, a shadow moved in the distance, just out of sight. Daniel froze, his pulse pounding in his ears. It wasn't Kifo, it was another animal, larger and unfamiliar. For a moment, fear gripped him. The jungle was home to predators too, and he had just been reminded of that. Slowly, he backed away, careful not to make a sound, until the shadow disappeared into the trees. Shaking off the encounter, he pressed on, his focus returning to Kifo. The trail grew fresher, the signs of the troop more apparent. He heard faint rustling ahead, followed by low, guttural sounds, a language he hadn't heard in years but instantly recognized. His heart raced. He was close now. Every step felt like it carried him closer to the moment he had been imagining for 5 long years. Daniel stepped into a small clearing, the sunlight breaking through the canopy above, illuminating the scene before him. His breath caught in his chest. There, just beyond the clearing, was a troop of gorillas, their dark shapes moving slowly among the trees. He froze, his eyes scanning the group, searching for one face, one presence. And then, he saw him. Kifo stood at the center of the troop, his massive frame unmistakable. He was no longer the small, vulnerable baby Daniel had rescued all those years ago. Now, he was a powerful silverback, commanding respect with every deliberate movement. For a moment, Daniel hesitated. The warnings came rushing back. Kifo might not remember him, and approaching could trigger aggression. His instincts told him to stop, to turn back, but his heart wouldn't let him. Slowly, Daniel lowered himself to the ground, making himself as non-threatening as possible. He didn't call out, didn't make any sudden moves. He simply sat there, waiting. Kifo noticed him almost immediately. The silverback turned his head, his piercing gaze locking onto Daniel. The rest of the troop grew quiet, their movements stilling as they sensed the tension in the air. Kifo began to move toward him, his massive frame gliding silently through the clearing. Daniel's heart raced as the silverback approached, each step deliberate and measured. Kifo stopped a few feet away, his dark eyes studying the man in front of him. For a long moment, there was nothing but silence, the kind that felt heavy with meaning. Then Kifo leaned in, sniffing the air between them. Daniel held his breath, his eyes never leaving the gorillas. Slowly, Kifo reached out, his enormous hand brushing against Daniel's arm. The contact was brief but electric. In that instant, Daniel knew. Kifo remembered. A deep, soft grunt rumbled from Kifo's chest, a sound Daniel hadn't heard in years but recognized immediately. Tears filled his eyes as he whispered, "It's you. You remember." Kifo lingered for a moment longer before turning back to his troop, as if to signal that all was well. Daniel watched him walk away, his chest tight with emotion. The reunion had been brief, but it was more than he could have hoped for. Kifo remembered, and that was enough. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting golden hues across the jungle, Daniel remained in the clearing, watching Kifo interact with his troop. The moment they had shared replayed in his mind, a moment of recognition, a silent acknowledgement of a bond that had stood the test of time. He felt a profound sense of gratitude, but also the weight of knowing this couldn't last. Kifo moved with confidence now, a leader among his own kind. Daniel smiled as he watched the silverback gently guide a younger gorilla back into the safety of the group. This was the life Kifo was meant to have, free and wild. It was clear that he had grown into his role, thriving in a way Daniel had always hoped he would. But as much as Daniel wanted to stay, he knew it was time to leave. Lingering too long could disrupt the balance of the troop or put them at risk. He rose slowly to his feet, careful not to make any sudden movements that might alarm the gorillas. Taking one last look at Kifo, Daniel whispered, "Goodbye, my friend. Be safe." As he turned to walk away, he felt a presence behind him. He glanced back to see Kifo standing at the edge of the clearing, watching him go. For a moment, their eyes met again, and it was as if the world around them faded away. Daniel raised a hand in a silent farewell, his heart heavy yet full. Kifo stood still, his gaze following Daniel until he disappeared into the trees. The jungle grew quiet again, the sounds of the troop fading into the distance as Daniel made his way back. Each step was bittersweet, but he carried with him the memory of their reunion, a reminder that some connections, no matter how unlikely, are timeless. As Daniel reached the edge of the forest, the sun finally dipped below the horizon, casting the jungle in shadow. He stopped for a moment, looking back one last time before stepping out into the open. His journey had come full circle, and though he was leaving the jungle, a part of him would always remain with Kifo. Back at the cabin, Daniel sat on the porch, staring at the now familiar photograph of Kifo. This time, the image brought not just memories, but a renewed sense of purpose. He thought about the jungle, about Kifo's troop, and the countless other animals still under threat. The bond he had with Kifo wasn't just a personal connection. It was a reminder of why this work mattered so much. Looking into the camera, Daniel spoke directly to the audience. "This isn't just a story about me and Kifo," he said. "It's a story about what we stand to lose if we don't protect our wildlife. Gorillas like Kifo face threats every day: poaching, habitat destruction, and climate change. We have the power to help, but only if we act now." Daniel's voice carried both urgency and hope as he encouraged viewers to get involved. Whether it's donating to wildlife conservation organizations, spreading awareness, or supporting laws that protect endangered species, every action counts. We owe it to these incredible creatures to give them a fighting chance. As he spoke, images of gorillas in their natural habitats flashed across the screen. Majestic silverbacks leading their troops, young gorillas playing among the trees, and researchers working to protect them. The message was clear. This wasn't just about one reunion. It was about a shared responsibility to preserve a fragile world. Daniel's voice softened as he closed. "The bond Kifo and I share is special, but it's not unique. Every animal has a story, a family, a life worth protecting. Let's make sure those stories continue." The video ended with a powerful montage: Kifo as a baby, Kifo now as a silverback, and Daniel walking out of the jungle, silhouetted against the setting sun. On the screen, the words appeared: "Protect the wild, protect their future." The music swelled, leaving viewers with a sense of hope and a call to action.